I think movies play the role in our culture that myths and legends used to play in ancient cultures, or that novels used to play 100 years ago. They're the art form that is capable of basically containing and expressing and making permanent the most important aspects of a culture or of a civilization.
There were a lot of great films in 2019, and then like just a memory hole of like what great film has come out since then. Like something happened in Hollywood. The scripts that are being written, the types of things that are being made today are very, very different than what was happening in 2018, 2019.
Mark, you've been known to monitor a situation or two. Welcome to the program.
Erik, how would you characterize me as a situation monitor-er?
Extremely eager. I picture you
Thorough.
Thorough. I picture you with security cameras, just extensively monitoring.
At all hours of the night.
Advance. So basically, Katherine Howard Hughes in the Penthouse. Is that
yeah. You're an elite situation monitor, which is why you're here. We're so happy to have you.
Well, speaking of movies, I'm watching all the James Bond movies with my 10-year-old, and we just got to Live and Let Die. No, which one? Diamonds Are Forever, which is the one set in Las Vegas. And it turns out the producer, Harry Saltzman of the Bond movies, was a close personal friend of Howard Hughes at the time. So they set the movie in Vegas and had all this cooperation from Hughes. And there's actually a Hughes character in the movie, but I'm just going to give a spoiler alert. Blofeld has kidnapped Hughes and is holding him hostage. And has sort of substituted in and is pretending to be Hughes. And James Bond scales the side of Hughes's big casino in Vegas at the time and drops down through the skylight into essentially Howard Hughes's bathroom. And the bathroom is literally set up with like monitors and like, computers and like typewriters and like, an elaborate phone system and then a single golden roll of toilet paper. And Bond drops into it and he's like, and I was like, that's the perfect bathroom.
Our new media team has a Twitter group chat called Monitoring the Situation, where that's the room that they want in the office for
exactly
exactly all the things happening on Twitter. With that, let's segue.
And did they ask for it to be the bathroom? Was that part of it?
Yeah, that would be the next evolution.
Would that just be an add-on feature?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's proceed.
Mark, not that many people, not everybody knows this about you, but you are an extensive movie buff and movie aficionado, and you've been having some commentary in our group chats lately over some films that you think are worth watching right now, and kind of broader commentary around what's been happening in film. So why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, so let me start by saying, kind of why this topic matters. And so, because like I think this does matter a lot. So first of all, I'll say like I've got like enormous respect for anybody who does anything creative, and so like every time I see a movie, I'm just kind of marveling. Like I know what it takes to make one. It's like making a tech startup or something. It's just like this incredible labor of love and effort and blood, sweat, and tears on everybody's part. And so it's just like a minor miracle, I think, whenever any of these things actually, show up as a 2-hour executed film. And so I think that's amazing. And so none of what we're about to talk about, should be considered a knock on filmmakers per se, or the people who put all this work into it. And then the other thing I say is, look, in the last, 5 years, decade, 20 years, there have been a tremendous number of what you could call highly entertaining movies, right? And some that I think are like jaw dropping, right? So like, just my, one of my favorite genres, action, the John Wick movies are like, the best action movies of all time. They're all in the last, 15 years. They're you could name that for a lot of different kinds of movies. The sort of, the entertainment factor is, remains very high. Having said that, I think movies, and Katherine, I see if you agree with me on this or not. I think movies play the role in our culture that myths and legends used to play in ancient cultures, or that novels maybe used to play, 100 years ago, or that maybe songs used to play or something like that. Which is basically they're the art form that is capable of basically containing and expressing and making permanent the most important aspects of a culture or of a civilization, right? So sometimes you'll hear the term, like there's this term called the Great American Novel, and this idea there are these certain novels like The Great Gatsby or whatever that or To Kill a Mockingbird that kind of capture the spirit of a times and kind of become immortal through doing that. And I think, basically, and I love novels, but like, the idea that novels do that, I think is probably at this point, pretty unlikely for a variety of reasons. We could have a whole separate podcast on that. But for the last, let's say, at least 60 years and probably 100 years, like movies have been the way that our culture is able to express itself in a way that is going to really deeply stand the test of time, where people 100 and 200 and 500 years from now are going to look back and kind of say, this is what these people are about. What, by the way, Catherine, would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think I think it was I think in slow decline probably the last 25 years. Because fewer, like, probably the 90s was the last decade where everyone watched the same movies, and the Oscars were indicative of like what's a great film that everyone has to see. I would love to hear when you think it started bifurcating, but it does feel like there's been this sort of bifurcation of, if, maybe you could say the Tarantino films of the last 20 years were widely watched and mattered in cinematic lore, but like it feels like there was a lot more to say it's like the next great American novel is actually the next great American movie. That feels like that maybe that ended in the 90s.
Yeah, so it's possible. Although you could also say, it is interesting because, as we've discussed in other forums, it's not that there aren't cultural artifacts that everybody participates in. Like, everybody, like, I am told there's this young lady named Taylor Swift who is apparently extremely popular, and I am told that other than me, everybody follows her with a great deal of avid attention. And I'm told that she has a new, I guess, what, album and movie, and
Album.
was that album? Yeah,
New
there's a
album.
movie. There's a new movie coming out too, I think, right? I believe.
I think everyone's works.
I remember her breakthrough. She actually, her first movie was the movie a couple years ago that came out that was so popular. Her
Oh,
movie.
she had a thing on Netflix that was sort of following her around the kind of.
Okay, here's something I know about Taylor Swift that you don't, which is the only time in my life I'm going to be able to utter those words. She did a famous thing actually in Hollywood and the movie industry. She released, I think whatever that was, she released that actually into theaters, and it was actually very significant that she did that because she cut the deal directly with the theater owners. And I think it was a straight 50-50 revenue split with the theater owners. And she booked it directly, and it was like a huge release. It was like on 4,000 screens, and it was like extremely popular. And like a lot of, Taylor Swift fans and a lot of, families with young girls, like, went to see it. And I remember it at the time because it was the same, it went big the same week that Martin Scorsese's movie, Killers of the Flower Moon, was in theaters. And if you remember the reviews and Martin Scorsese is one of these filmmakers who's made these mythical movies, that will for sure stand the test of time. And so, Killers of the Flower Moon was a movie that he intended to do that, and and I don't think it did, and we can talk about why not. But it was this movie about, it was a period piece set in the 1920s about, basically the rape and pillage of Native American, basically natural resources by, evil white people. But it was a 3-hour movie, and it was apparently, I didn't see it, but apparently it was extremely slow, and then apparently it had these extremely long stretches of silence because he was trying to get across this sense of like awe and grandeur and like emotional impact. And apparently what would happen is that movie would be playing adjacent to the Taylor Swift movie, and the Taylor Swift movie was so loud that whenever he would go to the silent part, you would just hear Taylor Swift pounding away on stage.
Probably helps the movie out. Probably
Which
moves it along a little bit.
arguably improved the movie from what I heard, filled in the missing soundtrack. So anyway, there are still mechanical issues with reproduction of these things. But how did I get on that? So anyway, the point is there are there are these things, we do have cultural artifacts that sort of have almost universal attention. It's just to me it's just a question of like, okay, like where the one, like, this was like true art, like with a capital A, is the thing that not only captures the popular imagination, like not only that people really experience, but also is the thing that actually has the lasting impact, such that in 10 years and 20 years and 50 years and 100 years, like people are still discussing it. And is it, and then, maybe a couple of things you could say. One is like, as time passes, the sort of most important cultural artifacts are sort of continuously reinterpreted. Right. And so the way that it comes across when it's released is not the same way that it comes across 5 or 10 years later, and then 20 years later. And then sort of each new generation that discovers it, maybe interprets it and talks about it in a different way. And then so basically like capital A art is the ability to do that. And so like I like, for sure it's true that the audience overall has fragmented. For sure it's true that like the internet, has like, created, is sucking away, just enormous amounts of time and attention from movies. It's certainly true that the business pressures in Hollywood, which we can talk about, are probably more intense than ever. But it is still true that I think it is still possible to do what we're describing. And we'll talk about this more. But I think we'd all agree Tarantino was able to do this with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, not that recently. So anyway, maybe I can say I still hold out hope that this is possible. I think this is a thing that the best filmmakers in the world and in the country really ought to be able to do. Would you agree with that? Or do you think that's too optimistic?
I hope. I mean, I think I'm a little more pessimistic than you, that I do think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the last American movie. but for different reasons, probably. Like, I think not only what, it's like, again, like Tarantino is, this, I think he has one more film in him, as he says, but that was really his final opus, right? Like the penultimate film is that was what he had been kind of moving towards. And I think he said his last film is going to be a much kind of scaled down, smaller sort of film when he decides to do it. But like, I think there's something about 2019 in particular. There were so many great films in 2019. There was 1917. Parasite won the Oscar, stole it from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in my opinion, but still was like a decent film. Like there were a lot of great films in 2019. And then like just a memory hole of like what great film has come out since then. Like something happened with COVID where we stopped going to the theater, and it does kind of map to that, no one goes to the theater anymore, but it's also like something happened in Hollywood, which I know we want to get your take on what happened in Hollywood, because it does feel like
Yeah.
the scripts that are being written, the types of things that are being made today are very, very different than what was happening in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, so just spend a moment. We'll spend a moment on the state of Hollywood for people who don't track it. And so there's a bunch of things. So yeah, look, the theater business has obviously taken a giant hit, kind of in the wake of COVID. COVID was like this big, was this big step down, because the theaters, were closed along with everything else. And then there's been this question ever since of kind of how to re-engage those audiences and get them to go back to the theater. And maybe that's just a secular change that goes with people being on their phones or whatever. Having said that, it's not quite, I don't think a complete explanation for what's happened to the art form. And the reason for that is the length of time that it takes to actually make a movie. Right. And so the movies that showed up in the theater in 2019 got greenlit in, call it 2015 or 2016. They got staffed in 2016, 2017, and then they got executed in like basically 2017, 2018. And then they went through, editing and post-production and so forth. And, for big movies, that's, that whole process is like a 2-year process. And then there's the long run up to release with the marketing campaign and all the put the actors on the road and do all the stuff. And so there's like a 4-month ad campaign or whatever. And so by the time you go through that process, start to end, it's like 4 or 5 years. And so for Once Upon a Time I don't know exactly when it was greenlit, but for it to show up in 2019 meant that basically the making of it, the backstory probably starts no later than 2015. And I just bring that up, which means the movies that hit the theaters in 2021 started in like 2017, right? And the movies that are showing up today started in 2020, right? And so the COVID explanation is not sufficient for what we've seen in the last 5 years, because those movies weren't greenlit under conditions of COVID. Those movies were greenlit under conditions of pre-COVID. And so whatever changes have taken place, which we can talk about, I think probably started around 2015.
And what is your theory around why things really started changing in the 2020 decade of film?
Yeah. So again, let me give, again, sort of maximum, kind of respect here, which is like, there's no question, a couple things. So just the secular changes. So one thing is, look, the streaming revolution has had a very big impact, and the streaming revolution hit Hollywood incredibly hard, very positively for a stretch, basically through the 2010s, because all the companies that were engaged in the streaming wars started spending just unprecedented amounts of money on televisions and shows on shows and movies of all kinds. And so there was just a giant flood of money. And I would say the mood in Hollywood, I don't know, whatever, 8 years ago or something, 6 years ago, you might even describe as euphoric from a business standpoint, just because, like, I mean, the big thing was when Netflix scaled up to the point where they were spending like $20 billion a year on content, which is just this giant budget, and everybody else, and they were like, whatever, a dozen streaming companies or whatever, all the different platforms that wanted to compete. And so that money kind of took off like a rocket. And then what's happened is, as the streamers are consolidating, as the streaming wars are kind of rationalizing, that money got pulled back. That was a big, kind of financial blow. And then the other thing that streaming did that has really affected things a lot in Hollywood, very negative way, which is streaming cut off the financial upside to films and TV. And so films used to, when they were hits, they would sell a lot of box office. And then they would sell like the television rights, or ultimately the streaming rights, and then they'd have this long aftermarket where they would sell DVDs, videotape rentals in the 80s and 90s, and then DVDs in the 2000s and 2010s. And so if you had a movie that was a hit, like, it could run, and it could run for years, generating just like enormous amounts of revenue and cash. And then same thing with TV shows. It used to be a successful TV show. The line, I think, was 6 seasons in a movie, where if it got to like whatever 100 episodes or something, it would enter syndication, and then you could sell it for hundreds of millions of dollars, and there would be all this upside for the people involved in creating it. And what happened with streaming and the economics of streaming is those forms of upside just vanished, because what happens is the streamers just buy the projects with like a cost plus model a lot of the time. And so you make the movie and you turn around and you sell it for like a 10% profit margin to a streamer. And then there's no aftermarket, because it's just a tile on the streaming service. Right. And there's no, there's no DVD sales. There's no TV syndication rights. Those concepts are irrelevant. the streamer just has sort of a perpetual right or a 20-year right or whatever to be able to show it at that sort of fixed fee. And so the upside got cut off, and that removed, I think, a lot of the economic incentive for kind of the wildcatting thing that Hollywood used to do more, which is to really take these chances on things. Like Hollywood used to work a lot like the venture capital model, which is you put 10 10 lines in the water, you get 4 bites, and you get maybe one grand slam. And if it works like that's a spectacular model, but the grand slam has to be able to scale economically in order for that to happen. That's been cut off. So that did not help. And then there's the big thing, capital B, capital G, capital T. The big thing that happened, of course, which is Hollywood being on the vanguard of culture, got hit by the thing, the cultural change of the last decade, like incredibly hard. And we've talked a lot about how tech got hit by that incredibly hard, and Hollywood got hit by it in a very intense way. Nobody's ever quite figured out the right way to talk about this. So sometimes you say things like wokeness or whatever. In the '60s they would have called it the new left. There's actually a term. There's actually my favorite term for it in Hollywood is there's a YouTube channel called Critical Drinker, where he's a movie reviewer. Is quite funny, and the Critical Drinker has been documenting basically the thing that hit Hollywood, and he in I would say in quite scathing terms this whole time. And what he calls it the message. And it's the message with a capital M. And it's actually really funny because for a long time, people who watch the Critical Drinker, he would never actually define what the message was. He would basically just say, this movie has been infected by the message, right? And of course, and you guys are both laughing because of course you already know what the message was. Everybody knows what the message was, right? All white people are racist. All men are, sexist. Everybody's a transphobe. And you just go, America's, a force for evil in the world, right? And you just go like right down the list of like everything that, everything that you would expect, from the last decade. America's, an incipient fascist regime, like just the entire package. Basically, like whatever's on the front page of the New York Times that day, right? Just the message. And so, movies transform themselves, very large percentage of movies that could have been great, in some alternate world could have been these great works of art, just basically became in some form political propaganda. Or you could, if you wanted to be more generous, you could say that, those will be the lasting artifacts of this last decade, right? Which is historians will look back and they'll be like, holy Lord, like these people were really like wrapped around the axle on like a bunch of political issues. Like my goodness. And so they got hit hard by that. And then the other and then that led to in Hollywood, what can only be described as a reign of terror. Which and this is something that occasionally Hollywood figures will talk about this in public, although very rarely because it's a very sensitive topic still. But if you know people in Hollywood, basically is through the especially the last 8 years. They felt like if they made one misstep on, casting or on the details in the script or use of words or the themes of a movie or anything, they just felt like they were in danger of just like a lightning strike from the sky, just like striking them dead on the spot. Like, and they had like friends, everybody in Hollywood had like friends whose careers just got like completely detonated, at one point, in one unpredictable way or another. And again, people have different opinions on this, and you could argue it was long needed or whatever. But like it became a thing, and it basically changed the process of like how projects were selected. It changed the process of but who made projects. It changed the process of staffing. It changed the process of screenwriting. It changed acting. It changed aesthetics. It changed like almost every aspect of how these projects get executed. And I just go through that because I think that's changing again right now. Like if you talk to the same people in Hollywood, what they'll tell you basically is, it's basically this year that the fever has broken. And there's a bunch of indications for that. And we're entering kind of the sort of post message, kind of era. And we don't know what era we're heading into. Maybe there's a new message or something, but like we're there's a phase shift that's underway. But that phase shift is going to take time because it takes time to make movies, right? The movies that are greenlit today, right, are not going to come out, until like whatever it's like 2027, 2028 soonest. And so so we're in this like liminal period or this interstitial period where for the next like 3 years, we're going to get like 1,000 movies that have like the message, and they're all going to act like the message is like brand new and fresh and nobody's ever heard it before because they all pretend that this is like some big revelation that like all white people are racist, right? Like in every movie. And there's going to be like 1,000 more of those the next 3 years, and they're just going to land like an absolute thud, right? Like, because it's just like, if you wanted that message, you got it, right? You already saw 1,000 movies to set you, like the next 1,000 movies don't contribute to that, right? And just to knock on one, and he's a brilliant filmmaker, but I just saw the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie, One Battle After Another, and it's literally like a time capsule. It's like a 2022 time capsule. It's literally like time froze in 2022. And in 2022, this movie would have been like, oh my God, like this movie is like, got the message, right? It's just like everything about it. We could spend hours just on this movie. And it lands today, and you're just watching, you're just like, wow, that was a weird time. Like, oh my goodness.
Oh, yeah, I want to talk more about this movie because I think it was Bret Easton Ellis who came out and was the first person, because it's getting all the Oscar plaudits, like, oh, it's definitely in line for the Oscar, right? And he came out and he's like, it feels musty, right? And I should get the actual like language he used because it was much worse than that. But he said it's like a musty film. It's exactly what you said. It's 2022. Like this was greenlit at a very different time, and now it's come out and like the world's moved on. And so I'm curious, like, do you think that we're still going to pretend these movies are great, even though they don't match with our time? Or is there going to be sort of a 3-year period where we are allowed to say, actually, like that doesn't make any sense anymore, and like maybe that movie shouldn't have been made?
Yeah, so this one is a complicated scenario. So just on the movie itself, the movie itself is actually, and it's quite like I quite enjoyed watching it. I quite enjoyed watching it not just for ironic reasons, but just also watching it of like how this happened. And there's a bunch of reasons. And and again, the filmmaker is one of the great filmmakers of the era, Paul Thomas Anderson. He made There Will Be Blood, and he made Boogie Nights, and like all these by the way, he made right there. We'll name 2 movies. Boogie Nights and There Will Be Blood are 2 movies that are like they're going to be in the Hall of Fame of the art form, where it's like 100 years from now, people are going to be like, wow. That's what that culture was about. And so he is one of those guys, and clearly that's what he was going for in this movie. It is a weird movie in that it's partially based on a famous Thomas Pynchon novel called Vineland, which is Thomas Pynchon's movie. Is Thomas Pynchon's novel basically about it's essentially, it's essentially veiled through whatever, but it's basically like about the Days of Rage, the Brian Burrow book, or the Weather Underground, basically the violent social revolution, basically from the far left in the 60s, and then sort of what happened in the aftermath of that. And so like that's the theme of the novel, but it's very much a novel of and about the 1960s. It's not considered, most people don't consider it maybe the best Pynchon novel, but like it's a good mid-tier one, and it's in the pantheon. And it turns out it had been Paul Thomas Anderson's favorite novel. He'd been trying to make a version of it for 20 years or whatever. But what he did basically was he kept the very basic kind of plot framework setup, but then he completely updated it for the message, right? And so like it has like specifically it has a whole bunch of, but it has this whole, basically it's a racial, it has a whole racial kind of plot structure to the whole thing, and sexual in ways that are fairly amazing, but that are completely based on the current moment, circa 2022. And so it's a little bit like the 1960s. It's like the early 2020s filtered through the 1960s, and so it's just a little bit odd with that. Arguably, it is kind of salient to our times, because I think if you were to retitle the movie, you would just title it Antifa the movie. Like it's like a full-throated celebration of basically violent social change, violent social revolution. Like, and it's completely unapologetic. Like, I'm gonna spoil it. I'm just gonna spoiler alert. By the end,
spoiler alerts for monitoring the situation. Everyone's already seen it here, so.
It's a 2-hour and 45-minute movie that I went, by the way, and I went to the theater and I paid full price, and like I smuggled in my snacks and like the whole thing. I go through the whole thing, and I'm like, oh, he's such a brilliant filmmaker. I'm hoping it's a subversive movie, right? And so I'm kind of hoping that the whole thing is like, by the end, he's like really like, he's like, okay, like these Weather Underground people who like went on the run for 20 years and destroyed their lives, and like, we're always, basically just like, crazed, privileged children like raging out against their basically their parents and blowing shit up and killing people, and just the whole thing was a giant mistake. And I was kind of hoping that would be kind of the way that you could tell the story. No. He's just like, oh no, that was great. like that was fantastically good. These people are amazing. Like these are the myths and legends of our time. He clearly wants to make these people into mythical figures. And then at the end, it's just very clear at the end, he's like, yes, and I completely endorse and support all of this. And this is exactly what these are the role models that children should have, and it's fantastic, right? And so this is one of those movies where, in a perverse way, maybe it stands the test of time that way, where it's just like, wow, these people had constructed a mythos, by in which violent robbery and murder basically is great, right? Like, it's wonderful, right? And so, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe it's like reading Emma Goldman essays a century later or something. It's just like, wow, these people kind of really got carried away. But like, it's not what it could have been anyway. This is okay. So one is it's out of time. although hopefully won't become more relevant. And then the other is, again, the business aspect of it, which is, being a great filmmaker. This is the one that he got like the real budget for. So this is like a much bigger budget than any of the other movies that he's made. And with that, he was, the cast is like just incredible. Like, so it's, Leo DiCaprio and Sean Penn and Benicio del Toro and like all these amazing, actors and actresses. But as a consequence, I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but, it was estimated to cost something on the order of $200 million to make. And then it's more money on top of that for advertising. The challenge with it, and then it's got Leo, and he's, by the way, he's fantastic in it, very entertaining. But by the way, what again, spoiler alert, one of the things about The Message, it's got the message. So the Leo character, I don't know, plays one of these. Basically, he's a bomber, basically in hiding for like 18 years or whatever, and he's got this daughter, is the daughter of his lover, who's this great, like, basically violent revolutionary of the era. They've been in hiding for 18 years, and he's like completely fried his brain on like, drugs and alcohol. It's just like, he's completely blown out as a person. He spends the entire movie running around like in his bathrobe, like, basically, basically high. And if you actually watch the movie carefully all the way through, it actually turns out nothing he actually does at any point in the plot ever actually matters. Like he plays no actual role in the plot. And so it's this like incredible performance, and it's incredibly dynamic and entertaining performance. And the movie's going to do well overseas as a result of that, because people love Leo. But like, again, it's consistent with the message of course the white male lead can have no actual role to play in the plot. Like it is, that's definitely not allowed. Like in the climax, he literally shows up at the end of the climax and just like, I'm here. And like, it's like all over, right? And, like, everybody's dead. Like it's just done. And so anyway, it's going to do reasonably well because it has Leo, but it's still going to lose like $120 million, are the estimates that I'm hearing, which is a pretty big loss.
Yeah.
For a movie like this. The fear in Hollywood always is when there's a movie that loses that much money, will the executive green light new original movies? So hopefully hopefully the lesson that's drawn from this is, basically it's, is the Bret Easton Ellis point, which is the what do you say, the fustiness or the
Musty. He said it's a musty film, like
mustiness. Yeah. Hopefully the conclusion is don't make movies that are going to be musty when they're released, right? Like, you didn't have to green light the 1,000th movie with The Message in 2022. Like, that was a choice, so maybe don't do that anymore. But maybe it's time to move on. Let me highlight the movie on the other side that I think is very underappreciated, and I think has, you could say maybe at best right now it's becoming a cult classic. It's just not that big of a hit, but like I have hopes for it, and I hope it becomes one of these mythic movies, which is Eddington. And let me start by asking: have you guys both at this point seen Eddington?
I haven't.
Okay, well, you're in for a treat. So my opinion, personal opinion, Eddington is the first capital A great art movie I feel like I've seen since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I think it clears the bar. And I would start by saying it's not a perfect movie. Like, there are things about it that I'm sure 5 years from now or whatever, even the maker of the movie might look back and say, could have done things differently. So, but it's like it's like it has the opposite of the musty feeling. It has the feeling of, oh, I'm actually finally seeing on screen real people again. Like, finally. Like real people set in the real world doing real things, where you're just like, wow, like I'm actually seeing the world that we've actually spent the last 5 years living in. And it's the first movie like that I've seen in a long time. And specifically, it's the first movie, and it's amazing that this is the case, even with the timescales that we're talking about. It's the first movie in which like the George Floyd riots actually happened. It's the first movie in which COVID actually happened.
Yeah.
It's the first movie in which social media actually happened. It's the first movie in which wokeness actually happened. It's the first movie in which Trump actually happened. Like, and it's actually, and this is why I'm sort of having the reaction to the movie that I'm having, which is just like, it's the only movie in which any of those things actually happened in the universe of the movie. Because, like, I don't know, you tell, unless I missed something, like every other movie that's come out that's been significant in the last 5 years, like, it's as if none of that ever happened. And my explanation for that is these are all the hot button issues that if you screwed them up, in Hollywood, you got your career destroyed. Right. So if you said the wrong thing about COVID lockdowns or vaccines, if you said the wrong thing about Trump, if you said the wrong thing about the Floyd riots, if you said the wrong thing about wokeness, like your career get obliterated. So we have like a generation of creatives who basically just like got taught, do not touch the stove. And the auteur who made Eddington, it's an auteur movie. This guy, Ari Aster, who's this young auteur, very, very talented guy. he basically was like, I'm just going to grab the stove with both hands. And I'm just going to like hold on for dear life. And
No.
it's like a roller coaster ride through every crazy fucking thing that happened in the last 5 years. And I was just like howling with laughter. Put it this way, me and the other 4 people in the theater who are watching it were just like, wow, it's amazing. It's finally happening.
Other bright side of this too is that it's not unknown actors, right? It's Joaquin Phoenix, Emma Stone. And what's really interesting about, as you said, like there's most media, or most movies try to kind of gloss over social media or things where it's like actually hard to depict it on a screen. Like there's nothing really interesting about looking at your phone, but like getting a COVID nostril test is actually like very funny. And I know like the trailer begins with like pulling up in this like old car and getting the nostril test. It's just like a funny thing. And so it's like, it's good that some of these more like absurd things that have happened in the last couple of years, like they're actually very cinematic. And they should be put on, like they should be put, like great filmmakers should showing them because they're so funny.
Yeah. So I'll do a couple again. I'm going to blow through the spoilers. Yeah. So the opening scene is Joaquin Phoenix. Joaquin Phoenix plays this crusty sheriff of this small town in New Mexico called Eddington, which actually kind of reminds me of the town I grew up in. And the key thing for the thing is Eddington, like there's just nothing in the town. Like it's like 600 people. It's just like the streets are empty. The stores are empty. I mean, it's like a town that was empty before COVID, right? And then the lockdowns hit, and then it became even more desolate. But like, there's nothing happening, and you could just walk around, and there's nobody there. And so Joaquin Phoenix plays the sheriff, who's like this crusty, unreconstructed, and he's not really a Trump supporter per se, but he's like this sort of crusty, kind of traditionalist, kind of guy. He's the kind of guy who just really does not want things to change that much. And like everything is changing around him, and it starts when COVID. It starts in like April of 2020. And he's sitting in his pickup truck in the middle of nowhere, and he's like eating a sandwich or whatever. And this other truck pulls up next to him, and it's these, it's set in New Mexico. And so there's the town that he's in are adjacent to these tribal lands. And so these 2 young tribal cops, Native American cops, pull up in a pickup truck next to him, and they're like young and let's say cooler than he is. And they're both wearing their masks, right? And literally they're like, roll down your window, and he rolls the window, and literally they're from their pickup truck into his. They're like, you have to put your mask on, right? And it's like literally, it was like for me, it was like the heaven has opened, the angels are singing. I'm finally seeing a capital M movie like this, and like he's a brilliant, and so like he gets across like in one look the feeling that I think we've all had for the last 5 years, which is like what the fuck? It's and that's just the opening scene, and then it cascades through all the COVID, and then it cascades through, and then spoiler alert again, or spoiler, it cascades through the Floyd riots hit midway through the movie, and then of course, the local high school, it's like, the local high school is like 100% white. It's New Mexico. And then the white kids basically become like obsessed with racial justice, even though they literally don't know any black people. And they start like basically having like full blown riots, like, in the main street, and like breaking store windows and like crashing everything. And there's one black person in town who's the sheriff's deputy, who's Joaquin's deputy, who's a military vet. And he's just like, what the hell? Like, it's like why do I have to defend the grocery store from the white kids, like trying to burn it down on my behalf? Like, what the fuck? Anyway, so the whole movie is like that. And then maybe just one more thing about it that's just hysterical. Erik, this is a good time for you to take a drink of water, because you're going to love this part. This is good for the spit take. Pedro Pascal is in it. And at first you would think Pedro Pascal plays the mayor, and at first you're like, oh, this is going to be a clear setup where Joaquin Phoenix is like the retrograde right winger, and Pascal's like the voice of reason. It's like, no, he's Gavin Newsom. Like, I swear to God, he's Gavin Newsom. Like 100% Pedro Pascal is playing Gavin Newsom.
What does he do?
I don't even want to like it's I don't even want to like I'm not even intending to badmouth Gavin. I'm just saying like or just every other politician, whatever is your idea of a politician who's like Gavin Newsom, like Pedro Pascal plays him, and just like could not be looking down on the sheriff character with more contempt. Like just absolutely just like and vice versa. And then basically what happens is that they effectively the sheriff gets frustrated by the whole thing, the lockdowns and everything, and so he decides to run for mayor, and so then it becomes a fight between the two of them, which by the way is just the beginning of the movie. Like it then gets actually quite a bit more elaborate after that. But the big thing about it is it's like a full it's just like an absolute full frontal examination from top to bottom, and like it pulls in it like Catherine. It doesn't have. It's interesting. It doesn't have a lot of like. It doesn't have like a lot of on screen graphics of like people on social media, but it does have this recurring thing, which again is just it's incredible how rare this is in movies, or maybe other filmmakers haven't figured out how to do it, which is these characters live in a world of social media. And so he does this great, like when a character in this movie wakes up, he rolls over and he checks his phone, right? Like it's our world. And he does, I think, a very good job of showing the interleaving back and forth of how people are. And again, this is like a, rural town in the middle of nowhere. People are living this, this double life that we all now live, which is we've got our in-person life and then we've got our online life. And there's this, question of which one is more real. And this is the first movie I've seen that actually just and it doesn't incorporate that. Like it's not social media, the movie, like that's not what the movie's about, but it just kind of shows naturally how the nature of reality has changed around that, and then how it influences real world behavior. And so anyway, so I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah. Isn't Emma Stone's character like taken by conspiracy that she finds online, or like what is her role in the movie?
Yeah, well, so this is part of the at this point I'm like grabbing the stove with both hands. Also, like she plays like the upper middle class white woman who's just like racked with anxiety, and this is like this is the plot arc. Like she's incredibly deeply unhappy. And so so she gets locked into like online conspiracies, and then there's this whole thing. I don't even want to spoil the thing that happens with her, because it's quite something, and it's quite a plot arc of its own. But she has her own kind of parallel life that kind of unfolds through this. Because she's Joaquin Phoenix's husband, and he loves her and has absolutely no idea what he has absolutely no clue what's going on in her head. Like he like married to her, he loves her. She's clearly extremely depressed. She's clearly extremely anxious. He has no ability whatsoever to understand her, communicate with her. And then her mother, she's very close with her mother. Her mother keeps showing up, lives in town, just fucking hates him and just is like scathing towards him. And he's like, what I'm doing my best. I can't read her mind. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so, it's got that, it's got like a whole arc there. And then it's got another one more. It's got the there's the in the little high school. There's a very attractive blonde high school girl who basically like becomes like completely committed to social justice, and it's going on and on. She's got like all the patriarchy. She's got all the talking points. Like she's ready for her sociology degree, and then all the like boys and men like orbiting around her basically like become obsessed with, like there's a white male high school kid who just like is like just generally oblivious, and he like has a thing for her, and so like he starts reading Angela Davis. Like in an attempt to basically become attractive for her. Anyway, so like, and he starts spouting off about white privilege and the whole thing.
Does it work? Because that's always the question.
It doesn't work.
Asking for tips.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work for the purposes that he. It doesn't work for the purposes that he intends it for, but he let's say he ultimately he has a very successful, I would say, plot arc of his own. Yes, he actually plays a major role in the end. He goes in his own journey and plays a major role with the end of the movie. Anyway, so it's just like it's one of these movies, and people has like different critiques of it, and it's a little bit of a I don't know what they call it, like a shaggy dog story, where like as the movie goes, like increasingly crazy things are happening, and things get kind of they get kind of deranged in sort of a way that is you could argue is like truly reflective of how deranged things got, or you could say maybe he gets a little bit carried away, but like it's just it directly it's such direct engagement with our times that and again, to me it was just like, wow, I'm actually seeing on screen our world, as opposed to this sort of either this manufactured view of a world that doesn't exist, or this sort of manicured view where these topics have just become untouchable. And so anyway, so my hope is it's the beginning of a wave of like, there's so much material. This is the old Tom Wolfe thing, which is like, what was Tom Wolfe's term? He said, what was it? His term is the beast with 8 billion feet, or what was this term? Like the mass of humanity. He had this term where he's like Tom Wolfe always had this point of view. The great novelist, journalist. The most interesting topic in the world is like the human race, right? Like the collective behavior of 8 billion people on planet Earth is like the most interesting thing in the world. And like the 8 billion people on planet Earth are always getting up to like the craziest shit. And like, if you want to like write great fiction, he was always telling people who wanted to write fiction, he's like, if you want to write great fiction, you want to go out and you want to be with the people and you want to actually observe what's happening. And it's so crazy that if you just like write it down, that's how you like write the great American novel. Like that's what you do. And so he would famously do this. And so when he did Bonfire of the Vanities, he immersed himself in Wall Street. And when he did Man in Full, he immersed himself in Atlanta real estate. And when he he did all the Back to Blood, he immersed himself in the Miami the Miami culture. And he would go do this. And of course, his critique was, the new generation novelists, they sit in their apartment in Brooklyn, with their typewriter, and they introspect, right? And that's why there's no more great American novels. And so, like Ari Aster is like he's like the filmmaker who got that. I don't know if he ever got read Tom Wolfe or not, but like where he understands that. He's like, oh, go immerse yourself in what's actually happening in real life and translate that. And he was, I don't know, uniquely able to do it, uniquely able to get away with it. I'm hoping he's the beginning of a wave of these. And it doesn't all have to be about COVID or the Floyd riots or whatever. There's many other topics you could do, but like there should be a great movie for every basically significant social cultural thing that happens. And there's those opportunities are just laying there's like hundreds or thousands of those opportunities just laying on the ground right now, for the creatives who can go pick them up. And again, and by the way, every creative writing this or hearing this is going to say, yeah, no shit, but this, will the studios green light it and pay for it? And that would be my other hope, which is some combination of the bolder executives at the streamers and at the studios. Example, David Ellison, who's clearly very very brilliant guy, taking over Paramount and maybe buying more studios. Like guys like him are in a position to greenlight an entirely new generation of movie that could be both commercially successful and could be true art.
Yeah. No. So I guess is it your view that like we'll have this like 5 to 7 year window of musty films that people like kind of pretend are decent, but then like we kind of get the Eddingtons as well, where you're going to actually see things open up again. So we'll have this sort of like nice period of weirdness. Like I actually think looking back 50 years from 50 years from today, it'll be fun to look back at these films and be like, that was wild, that was what we were talking about at the time. So but your view is that it is going to open up, that there will be more Eddingtons, there'll be more extremes, and it's not just going to be one battle after another, kind of the message.
Yeah. So just quickly, one more thing on one battle after another. So the critics are rapturous about this movie, right? And so if you read Rotten Tomatoes, the critics are it's like 98% or whatever, and the critics are just like, this is like the most brilliant movie of all time. This completely captures yes, this is like the ultimate chronicling of like America's descent into being the Fourth Reich. Like this is like absolutely glorious. Yes, absolutely revolutionary violence should be glorified. Like the critics are like all in, right? And the movie critic community has like gone hard in on this, just like so many other creative communities, and so they're all in. By the way, this movie, I don't know if it's going to, but like it wouldn't be surprising if it sweeps the Oscars, right? It's just like the best movie ever made. But now it's just going to be like everybody who has been through this spin cycle for the last 8 years is I think people are onto it, including the audience. And so I think even the people participating in kind of what is already kind of an orgy of kind of hyper exaggerated critical admiration are probably all realizing that they're fundamentally being dishonest. But so Katherine, to your point, like yeah, that machine, like the sort of the message machine, like that machine is continuing to spin for now. It's just very clear that like there's just like smoke and parts flying off of it. Like it's just like it is gonna rattle to a stop. And then if you talk to people in Hollywood, basically what they'll tell you is, by the way, independent of people's politics, what the sort of, I would say, sharp people in Hollywood generally all say is, yeah, the cultural fever has broken. You can now get movies greenlit today that you could not get greenlit 2 years ago. Specifically, and this is amazing, then this is good, but like you can have comedies again. Like they actually say that, by the way, they say this, like they're like, we can now make comedies again. You can have funny movies, right? Because to have funny movies, you need to poke at sacred cows, right? Like the thing that makes comedy funny is like when it's like subversive, when it like when it touches a nerve, like that's what great adult comedy is. And you just could not make a funny movie for the last 8 years. Like it was impossible. It was way too risky. But what they're saying now is that you can. And then maybe the other signal indicator, Katherine, of what's happening, which is Mel Gibson finally got greenlit to do his sequel to Passion of the Christ, which is the resurrection movie, and which he's making right now. And at least my friends in Hollywood are like, yeah, that never would have happened. Like that never would have happened under a Kamala administration. That never would have happened without the election result. And again, these are not even people who are pro-Trump. It's just, okay, like the national mood is shifting. We're not. Yes, Mel Gibson of all people being like one of the clearly great filmmakers of our time, and having all of the issues that Mel Gibson has. Like, yes, that guy should get to make a movie, and specifically that guy should get to make that movie.
Yeah.
And that's an example of what I'm talking about. Is that's possible this year in a way that it wasn't before.
Well, the other thing that I think yesterday, Young Washington came out, the trailer, which Joel Studios, which again is not Hollywood, it's based in Provo, but has proven that they can make very successful films for a different pocket of
Yeah.
the country that actually likes patriotism. But I think in some ways, like the Top Gun success story, yes, it's nostalgia, but like the fact that it did so well at the box office shows that there is an appetite for totally different content. Like 50% of the country would love to see movies that are patriotic or about something, in a biopic in history that's really interesting about George Washington. So I think in some ways it's like there is sort of this business case too of wow, like the 50% of the country that's been starved for the content they want will actually pay to go to the theater, and maybe we should support them.
Yeah.
To that end, Mark, do the executives appreciate the Rotten Tomatoes phenomenon, or just how distinct sort of with the critics or even their own staff are from the actual audience?
Yeah, they live it. They live it. And so, like I said, like for the last 8 years, it's basically been a reign of terror.
Yeah.
Because these critics and like who the people these critics represent, like had the power of life and death over people's careers. And then they know the critics kind of went nuts. But this is the problem with there's not that much they can do about it, right? The critics were able to succeed in their own field. It's just like everything else that happened in media. The critics were able to succeed in their own field by kind of going arbitrarily wild. And then, there's basically nothing that if you're a movie studio executive, there's really nothing you can do about it because, what do you do about it if you ignore them, they attack you. If you engage with them, they attack you. If you attack them, they attack you back. And so, there's been very little to do. And then, the critics are not, well, okay. So that's been happening. And Hollywood, like Silicon Valley and like every other industry, like there is insularity to it. And so, there's a self-referential thing. And so when sort of opinion shapers, move against you, it becomes a real problem. And in Hollywood, people get fired, right? Like, every studio executive kind of knows that at some point they're going to get fired. People get fired off of projects all the time. When people get fired, by the way, off of projects in Hollywood, like they may not eat, they may not get another job for for 2 years or 5 years or ever. And so, it's a high tension environment. And so, yeah, I think they don't understand that. By the way, I also think that, especially the sort of, the boomer executives, the Gen X executives, they'll also tell you the same thing you'll hear, that you heard in the Valley and in Washington and elsewhere, which is, wow, the young staff is really radicalized, right? And so, so they're also afraid of their young staff. And then, by the way, they're these are mostly public companies. They're also afraid of their boards. The boards are afraid of the public shareholders. The public shareholders radicalized. And so it was a very similar phenomenon to what happened in tech, which is kind of this sort of collective, I don't call it like wildness or, kind of this intensity thing, kind of happened. And then it really couldn't be openly discussed for a long time and probably still can't. Like they probably still really can't talk about it in public. A few of them are starting to, but like not really. So for the most part, the conversations are kind of in the background. But against that, it's just like, okay, that's broken a bit. And part of it also is just the business, the kind of business aspect of it. Which is, the classic is, the big moneymaker in Hollywood for the last 20 years has been superhero movies. And let's just say coincident with the beginning of the message is the results of those movies collapsed. Right. And so, and like at some point, they need to go sell some movie tickets. Like at some point they need to deliver revenue. And I think they've gotten, I don't know, the message of the message, which is, if all you are is on board with the social trend, right. Especially Katherine, to your point, especially when that social trend gets old and it's no longer, au courant. Like you can't run a public company based on reviews, right? It like at some point,
Right.
butts do have to show up in seats. And so I think that's also kicked in. And so the financial pressures are very painful right now. They're probably not helpful. I don't know. The financial pressures in Hollywood are it's hard to say because on the one hand, when there's financial pressures in Hollywood, of course, the argument is fewer movies get greenlit, and then the executives become more risk averse in the kinds of movies they're willing to greenlight. But I think it also means that they are also less willing to greenlight projects that are being greenlit only for political reasons, or only for social cultural reasons, or only out of a sense of fear. And so I don't know exactly how that balances, but hopefully things get more exciting. By the way, of course, the other big topic in Hollywood is AI.
I was just gonna ask,
Yeah, so that's the 800-pound thing, and to their credit, they're say they're highly aware of it. They're highly alert to it. And then, by the way, there are a bunch of filmmakers, including some folks that I know, that are like super excited. And so there are including some like I know of like two like triple A list like directors, filmmakers, top end people who are like very excited about what's possible. And are going to fully embrace it. And there's a bunch of other people who are very excited. And so there's going to be an embrace by at least part, but there's also there's a lot of Hollywood has always had kind of a fear driven reaction to new technologies, and there's some of that. And then there is this attachment, and Hollywood is actually very acute. There's this attachment of like AI politics to like woke politics, and so if you're still super woke, you're also like super anti AI. And there are these like it's basically like the woke activists have picked up AI as the new thing that they're going to agitate about. And they're mounting basically already like pressure campaigns on the studios to like basically vow to never use AI. And at least so far, the studios, to their credit, are like, no, we're not going to do that. Like the studio. So far, I think the studio executives have all been consistent, which is like, look, we've always used technology. The movie camera itself is technology. Special effects, like we've always used technology. Videotapes, DVD, streaming, these are all technologies. Every movie has CGI. Like that's one of my little fun facts about the history of movies is Tron. Tron was the first. There's a big sequel for Tron that's out this week. The original Tron was 1982 from Disney, and it was the first movie that had integrated use of computer graphics, which was the big thing at the time. And as a consequence of that, Tron was disqualified from the Oscars because they cheated by using computer graphics, right? Right. And so to go from that world to the world in which every movie has CGI, and for the most part, you don't even know that there's CGI in it. But you just see a romantic comedy, and they're using CGI to do all kinds of things in it, and you don't even notice, and it's just taken completely for granted. And so, like, I think the studios, I think understand that. I think they're gonna actually embrace AI enthusiastically. But there's gonna be this like, at least there's an attempt to like gin up a moral panic around it, and try to basically keep it out. And I don't think it's going to work because I think the economics are too compelling. But anyway, but then the other thing with AI is, of course, AI is going to be super helpful to existing filmmakers. But the other thing is AI for sure, and we see this especially in this last couple of weeks with the new version of Sora, and a lot of these other new things that are coming out. AI is going to make a whole new kind of filmmaker possible to exist for the first time, which is the filmmaker with no visual skill, right, or access to a set or to a camera or to actors, but with an idea. People are going to be able to make, it's going to start with shorts and animated things and so forth, but it's going to work its way up to full movies. And so people with people who otherwise would be limited to only being novelists or being maybe people who do graphic novels, but are creative geniuses, are going to be able to actually make full movies with AI. And again, I think that's a reason for like profound optimism. I think we're going to get like completely new kinds of, basically filmed entertainment from people who otherwise never would have been able to access the medium. And I think that also is, I'm very positive on that.
Can we end, because you brought it up, on comedy? I know you saw Naked Gun, or the new Naked Gun film. What was your thoughts on, is comedy working? Does it have to be nostalgic for it to work? But maybe tell us a little bit about that film and whether it's a reason to be positive on comedies in the future.
Yeah, so I thought Naked Gun was actually a little bit of a minor miracle. For a couple reasons. So one is, look, it's a sequel to movies from like 40 years ago. And so, how many people even remember the original Naked Gun movies? It actually turns out a lot of people do. They're beloved movies, but also it turns out like you can make it's great. It's a great comedy. It's like a fantastic comedy. It's very funny. It worked. It worked commercially. It worked artistically. It honored the original material, but it was also like it was deliriously loopy in its own way. I highly recommend it. It's very funny. But it actually is striking to that point. It also, like Eddington, it's also a post-message movie. And this is actually, and maybe this is a reason for optimism, which is, again, if you go back through the time scale, like that thing was greenlit no later than 22, probably in 21. So at the height of every movie has to have the message, that movie was still greenlit, and it got all the way through and out the other side, and there's not a trace of it in it. And so like it's a pure comedy. It's a pure comedy. It's like the original movies. It's a pure comedy. It's a pure absurdist, kind of modern Three Stooges, style comedy. Liam Neeson, of course, plays against type, and is of course a brilliant comedian and just kills it. And then Pam Anderson, the great icon of 1980s femininity. It's her big starring role, and she just like absolutely is just fantastic. Like she's just like absolutely kills it. She's hysterical, and she's just like there as a person, and like she's not wearing, she's just like she's like she's just like full woman in natural form, and it's great. And it's like there's no there's none of the casting, let's say, aspects that kind of cause problems. There's none of the there's no script. It's just like an extremely well executed, like it very easily could have been made in 2012 or in 2008 or in 2002. Now look, it doesn't, it doesn't move the artistic ball forward, right? It's a very well executed example of a genre, but it is a movie that it was somehow able to escape all of the traps that all of these other movies have gotten into, and was able to make it out and to be a big commercial hit. And again, I think the executives are very encouraged by that. The audience is still there for that. I'll just give you it doesn't really have any like racial politics or whatever, but it does have it did have one thing, which is for people who haven't seen it. It was famously a movie originally that one of the major stars of it was O.J. Simpson, playing a character named Nordberg, who got into all kinds of unlikely trouble. So they do this scene where I'll just spoil one thing because it was extremely funny. Liam Neeson. So Liam Neeson plays the son of the original, main guy, Leslie Nielsen, in the movie. So Frank Drebin, and then Liam Neeson plays Frank Drebin Jr. And then Liam's sidekick plays the son of Leslie Nielsen's sidekick from the original movie. And then there's a young black guy on the team. And normally in a movie it's like, okay, of course there's like a young black guy on the team, but they do it really well. Which is they've got out in the hallway of the police station in the movie, they've got Leslie Nielsen's photo up on the, he passed away, so they got his photo up, and Liam Neeson does this thing where he like kneels down and he's like, oh, Father, I'm trying to live up to your expectations and trying to be a great police officer, and he's like sobbing, and there's tears, and then next to it is like his sidekick with the sidekick's photo, and he's like, oh, Father, I miss you so much, and I want to be a great cop. And then there's the black kid, and he's looking up at a photo of OJ, and he just looks at the camera and he just goes,
Perfection.
Absolutely perfect. Yes. So yeah, comedies are good. By the way, let me put in a plug for one more movie. Have either of you guys seen Fantastic Four?
No,
probably not. Fantastic Four is the most pro-family movie in Hollywood since I can't even remember.
Wow.
Katherine in particular, I think you'll be astonished.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Come out.
What's that?
When did it come out?
It came out this summer. It came out this summer, and Marvel. Just for context, it's one of the big it's one of the new Marvel tentpole properties. And the Marvel machine, did incredibly well from like Iron Man in 2008 through Avengers Endgame and like whatever 2020. But for the last 5 years, many of the big Marvel projects have not done well, both the TV shows and the movies. And you could argue different reasons why, but like Critical Drinker would tell you it's because they became consumed by the message. Yeah. Fantastic Four is it's look, it's like a diverse cast. It's got like a lot of the modern stuff in it. But however, it's just like 100% pro family, in like a very actually quite deep and moving way. And so again, it's a little bit like, wow, they greenlit this thing in 20, and maybe this reason maybe I'm actually too cynical. Maybe in 2022 the filmmakers already realized what was happening. And so maybe they actually had like their own version of the underground movement where they're like, all right, it's time to start planting the seeds for what is going to come out of this whole thing when sort of the panic subsides. And you could say like Fantastic Four is it's like a true audience pleasing blockbuster from a studio that has been obsessed with the message that comes out and doesn't have a trace of it in it at all. And furthermore, it's like 100% above. Like I wouldn't say it's a superhero movie, so it's not like a political. I wouldn't say it has like political content per se, but it's like 100% pro family in a way that's very touching.
Great, we'll put it on the list.
Yes.
Do you think
Atlas? By the way, your kids will love it. Your kids will love it. I took my 10-year-old, and he was like, yeah, he doesn't react emotionally to things, but he was like as close to crying in a movie as I've ever seen him. So,
wow. Do you think Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead could get made today? And do you think there'd be an audience for it?
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny. It's so funny, especially Atlas. Like Atlas Shrugged has become Atlas Shrugged. People who don't know, it's the sort of famous Ayn Rand novel. It's kind of her most successful novel. It's the novel that basically it clearly is like a great mythic American novel. Like it clearly clears that bar that we were talking about earlier. It is one of the great American novels. It's of a time and place, which is sort of the sort of 1950s, but it's written in a way that can be kind of deliberately timeless. It's actually kind of interesting how it's written because it's like obsessed with railroads on the one hand, which makes it kind of look back to the 1800s. But it also has like science fiction elements. And she kind of did that, I think, deliberately so that it would kind of have this timeless kind of. She's really talking about, some movie. It's a novel, as the great novels. It's a novel about people and the behavior of people. But she does this thing where she kind of abstracts the specific content of it in order to kind of try to make it timeless. And I think it works quite well. And the Fountainhead is another version of that. The Atlas Shrugged basically is about broadly it's about American dynamism. It's American dynamism in the movie. It's about industrialization and progress and science and going to the stars and like achieving great things. And the shape of societies that do that. The Fountainhead is more about, I would say, artistic achievement. And artistic purity, and it's sort of similarly evocative. And so both those novels are, high up on the list of novels that will be very influential, in 100 years. Both of those novels have been absolutely scathingly hated by every, good cultural commentator and critic for the last, basically since they came out. Like and those novels are just attacked in like the most vicious possible terms. Like absolutely. In fact, famously, Whittaker Chambers, the reformed communist, reviewed Atlas Shrugged for National Review when it came out in the 1950s, and he basically called her a Nazi. In National Review, Whittaker Chambers, who became this famous right winger, basically calls Ayn Rand a Nazi. Ayn Rand, of course, being a Jewish refugee from Russia, he said the novel, quote, has the whiff of the gas chamber about it, right? And so like, which by the way, it doesn't. But anyway, very unfair. But anyway, it's like your divergence in the Rotten Tomato scores of the critics versus the audience. Like basically everybody who's read Atlas Shrugged like loves it. And everybody who's like criticized it for a living just fucking despises it, right? Just like completely despises it. And so, and what's interesting about it, and maybe this is the importance of the novel, is, to your question, like that aspect of it lives today. So, like anybody today who every time I've ever talked to anybody who's read Atlas Shrugged in the last 5 years, they're like, wow. It's like the novel about the world we live in. Like it's like, oh, I know that guy, and I know that guy, and I know that guy. And Erik knows what I'm talking about. Right, like these are all people, right? Like these are all people, these are all archetypes of people. We know who these people are, we know what they're doing. It's amazing how perceptive it is, 60 or 80 years later, like how primal she made it, that it has that relevance. And by the way, it's tremendously entertaining, and it's like this sprawling narrative, and it's these incredible characters. And so yeah, it very clearly ought to be a 3-part movie, or at a huge budget, or ought to be like an 8 season, 10 episode, 80 episode total, lavish HBO show or something. But like the cultural overlay of that, like what it would take in Hollywood to do that, and the level of attack that you would come under, the level of savagery that you would encounter if you're the executive or the actor or whatever. I mean, it would be every bit as intense today as it was in the 1950s when the novel came out. And so like that would be that would be the indication that like we're in a like really different world. I've talked to some folks in Hollywood about it. They all know it. They all understand this. They all know the novel. They're all very familiar with it. They all, by the way, love the idea of doing things that have pre-existing brands and audiences built in. Because that really reduces the risk. But like if you really talk about it, it's a little bit like a hot stove, step away. And by the way, and again, it's very striking that a novel from like whatever 1953 can still be generating the hot stove reaction in 2025. Is pretty amazing.
And the flip side of that is, because it's such a cult classic, that people would come out and like it would make a lot of noise in a good way.
It would be the Silicon Valley version of the Minecraft movie, right? Like it would just be like, yep, we're all going.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe it's not a big enough audience or whatever to maybe that's not a big enough cult classic thing. But like by the way, it sells. Like it's one of the best selling novels of all time. It sells, enormously well today. It sold well basically since it came out. It sells far better. I mean, it's one of these things. It'll sell far more copies this year than any well-reviewed novel, that the New York Times Book Review talks about, right? And so and yet it is just like, it is so completely politically unacceptable that it's like off the map. So that would be the ultimate test. I would love to see it happen. I don't know. And by the way, this maybe the answer here, maybe this is the AI, right? Maybe the answer here is AI. Maybe what we need is the AI system where you feed the novel in and it makes the movie. Which, by the way, first, now that I say that, like for sure that's going to happen. And so, maybe that's actually the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, we were laughing offline about how someone was using Sora to make like something that we thought was better than South Park, and
Yes.
So it'll be interesting to see if a whole new crop of filmmaker sort of democratizes the industry a little bit. That it's not just Hollywood, but it's people from all over, and studios don't have this sort of monopoly over creation of high quality stuff. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, so South Park actually, let's close on this, but just briefly on South Park. South Park was very much like what you're saying with AI filmmaking right now, but in 1993. So I remember when the original South Park came out, The original South Park came out in 1993, and it was significant. It was the first internet viral video ever. It was the first video, and this was like pre-streaming, pre-YouTube,
Right.
years before all of that. And so it literally distributed at the time it was literally a QuickTime movie. It was Apple's QuickTime video format. And it was a downloadable thing. And like, if you wanted to download it on a modem, you had to like leave the modem on for like an hour or something to like download this thing. And what it was a digital scan of a video Christmas card. So there was an executive in Hollywood at the time that wanted to make his friends a special kind of Christmas card. And so he hired these two basically scrappy young, basically film students, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, who had no credits, and they were just kids and hadn't done anything yet. And he hired them and he basically said, make the most offensive, basically like 3-minute video Christmas card you could possibly imagine. And so, and with these kids, it was a technology at the time. What they did was camcorders, digital camcorders are brand new. So they used digital camcorder, but then they did stop motion. They had no money, so they did stop motion animation using little using literally construction paper characters. And so the reason the characters look like they do is because literally in the original thing they were cut out of construction paper, and they were literally moved by hand, frame to frame. And then the two kids did the voiceovers. But it was from the very beginning, it was the same characters: Cartman and Kyle and Stan and Kenny, right? And in South Park, which is the town that these kids grew up in. And then it was this 3-minute Christmas card, and it was Santa Claus versus Jesus. And Santa Claus versus Jesus ended up in a full kung fu fight, complete with like blood and like body parts, right? And so it was like this. It was like it was intended to be like maximally offensive, but it was really funny. And so somebody got there, and literally it was sent out on videotape. Right. It was like pre-DVD, right? So sent out on videotape, and somebody actually scanned the videotape, which is actually hard to do. And then it went super viral on the internet and became big. And so it's an example of, that everything I just described, the camcorder, like that was the AI of its time. It let these kids who had no access or no knowledge even necessarily of like traditional animation production methods to do this. By the way, when those kids actually then got they then actually, South Park's like a full studio now. It's been tremendously financially successful. They now have a complete state-of-the-art studio production facility. And what they've used it for is they've used it to hyper-optimize computer models of the optimal recreation of the aesthetics of the construction paper. And so if you watch South Park episodes today, you see actually the characters there's actually a depth to the animation that shows the layers of the construction paper. It's all produced digitally today, but like they've used state-of-the-art digital tools to reconstruct the physics of construction paper, 30 years later. And so, yeah, so they were able to do that. And then obviously, they were maybe the most successful like animation duo of the last 30 years. And yeah, I think that the AI thing we're right on the tipping point of that. And your point, like maybe we actually just saw the first one. It's so let's say toxic that it's hard to recommend that people watch it.
Yeah.
But it's for sure a South Park caliber level thing created in AI by somebody who didn't use any of the traditional, they didn't use any traditional, techniques that you use for animating anything. It was created entirely with Sora, scene by scene. And yeah, it just as a demonstration of technology, it's obvious that moment has now arrived. And to your point, Erik, like I do think, for example, I think there's now actually a new form of political propaganda at loose in the world, which is, basically the custom produced, basically South Park-ish, kind of, video series, and AI is going to make that so easy for people to do that you're going to be able to do, anybody in any electoral race is going to be able to hire some kid to do things like this. And so it's going to be like this. It's like, I don't know, decentralized satire or something like that. Yeah. And so, yeah, the moment has arrived. The art form shifts again.
On that note, we got to let you go. But this has been a fantastic episode of Monitoring the Situation. Thanks so much for coming on, Marc.
All right. Fantastic. Situation monitored.